Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Steve Isherwood, Chief Executive of the ISE, and welcome to our Market Updates webinar today. If you haven't joined one of our ISE webinars before, just a quick idea of how it, give you a quick idea of how it runs. Shortly, I'll hand over to our Chief Research Officer, Tristram, who's conducted the research, and he will share the insights. We'd love to have your thoughts, your comments, and your questions, so please do engage with the platform. We had over 200 registered, so we won't do it. We won't get you to come online and do it, but if you can use the questions dialog box, that would be great. Once Tristram's finished, I will I'll feed those questions back into Tristram. Also, the recording, you'll get an email later on today with a link to the recording if there's anything that you missed. And also, please do feel free to share that recording with colleagues, etc., because the more that we get the word out about what's happening, I think the better. Right, that's enough from me. Tristram, over to you. Do you want to take it away?
Great. Okay, well, I'm just going to share my screen. So great. Can you see my slides okay there?
Yep, that's good to me.
Great. All right. So what I'm going to present today, it's an update. It's based on some a new approach that we're taking, which is doing some polling of our members. So I'm going to take you through some of the data from that, put it in a little bit of context. Probably won't take too long. So, but then we've got plenty of time for questions, or even to go to lunch a bit early if we, depending on how we go. So we've called it "The Market Bounces Back." And I'm going to sort of give you some information about that, and we perhaps will think about whether that's really the whole story. So obviously everything at the moment is very much in the context of COVID. And for those of you who follow the ISE closely, you'll know we've been doing these COVID updates. We've now moved to doing them every fortnight because thankfully there's a bit less to say about COVID than there was at the height of the pandemic. But what we can see, this is the data from this week. Actually, it went out today, this bulletin. What we can see here is that the number of cases and deaths has been falling week on week for quite a long while now. We really, things are really improving. Now they're not, COVID's not gone away altogether. Of course, it hasn't. We're still not quite back where we were last summer. So despite all of the vaccine and all of the lockdowns and everything, we've still got some way to go. But generally, the signs are pretty good, and the government's lockdown plans are proceeding kind of, on target, really. So from the point of view of student employment, that's all pretty good news because it gives us a much more stable basis on which to make decisions than this kind of constant up and down. Now, we can talk a lot about COVID, and the purpose of today is not to do that. There's lots of discussion about whether this really means it's over. Obviously, that if we look at, if I was to show you international figures, we would see that we were actually in the middle of another peak. But in the context of the UK, assuming that new variations don't emerge that aren't resistant to vaccines, and assuming that the rest of the world ultimately follows some kind of similar pathway, we've got good reasons to be optimistic. So we've, and part of that is the vaccine program. I won't say a lot about this, it's well covered, but we're now well over half of the population are vaccinated. So what does this mean for unemployment and need levels? Well, this is another figure that we regularly update. This is some data from the Office for National Statistics. What it tells us is that youth unemployment unemployment in general, and the NEET rate, which is the number of young people who are not in education, employment and training. Sorry, there we go. Have been going up, but not by that much. I think generally people have been quite encouraged, and the furlough scheme has been doing its work. So we haven't seen a huge increase in unemployment that certainly some people were worrying about, this time last year, or even in the autumn last year. Now, there is reason to be a little bit less optimistic about that. When we look at the youth labour market, the number of young people who are unemployed has gone up quite a bit, and the sort of proportion of all people who are unemployed who are young has gone up a bit. Now, that's going to be interesting for us because obviously that's much closer to the ISE type market. But, you know, as I'll show you in a second, that doesn't seem to be hitting most of the parts of the market that we're working with. But and it may well be that the current opening up that we're seeing of the economy, and particularly things like the reopening of retail, the kind of gradual reopening of hospitality and so on, is going to make more opportunities for young people. So there will be more work available. So, you know, so far so good. There's quite a lot of good news. We'll kind of think about how much that's the whole story. Now, when you start to dig around, as I do a lot in different news stories about the labour market, there's quite a lot of different messages out there. It's quite difficult to get a full picture of what's going on. So on one hand, there's quite a bit of what I would sort of call long-term anxiety about the labour market, about the economy. And so, you know, there's the story a couple of weeks ago about various employers calling for a national prosperity plan, basically saying the government needs to step in and to do more. On the other hand, you also get stories like this, which are saying that, you know, those companies that have high-paid, higher educated staff, which is basically a lot of them would be sort of ISE type companies, they're doing okay. There are certainly sectors of the economy that are doing okay. And this is one of the things that we'll see as we dig into some of our figures, is that the way in which the pandemic has panned out is quite sectoral. So, you know, we can present those overall pictures, which say, you know, overall people are generally doing a bit better than we might fear they would do. But when we start to dig in a bit deeper, we can see that there are ways in which the impacts of the pandemic have hit certain sectors, certain types of businesses more than others. And when you start to look at who works in those kinds of industries, we often find that there are impacts that are disproportionately on young people, on lower skilled people, on women, and so on. Now, you know, in our best effort to try and add to all of this noise about the labour market, we did quite a bit of press work last week, and we got stories like this, which you probably saw in some of the newspapers and so on, which said that graduate and school leaver appointments were back on the rise. And I'm going to give you some of the stats that lie behind those stories today, so that you can kind of get a bit more of a sense of what's going on. So let's look. So new starters for 2021. So this is this is what firms are currently recruiting, and are they likely to end up at the end of this year? Essentially, our question is: are you likely to end up appointing more people than you did last year? So remember, last year was a depressed year. We estimated that the graduate market was down by about 12%, interns quite a bit more, and so even if things are picking up, it doesn't necessarily mean that we'll be back up to pre-pandemic levels. But the overwhelming story that we're getting from the data is definitely that things are picking up. So this is a kind of quite a lot of detail here. I'm going to break this down, make it a bit easier to follow. But broadly, the bulk of the plurality, the biggest chunk of employers are saying, yeah, we'll do about the same as we did last year. But more people are in the slightly more, somewhat more, a lot more than they are in the slightly less, somewhat less, and so on. So in general, we're seeing a kind of shift to people recruiting a bit more than they were last year. So let's break that down a bit. So this in this chart, I looked at what employers told us in the last recruitment survey. Now, the data, the way we ask the questions, is not exactly the same, but I've kind of recoded them and matched them up a bit. And it basically tells us. So in 2020, if we look at this one, you know, for graduates, almost half of employers were recruiting slightly to substantially less graduates than they were the previous year. So last year was definitely a year of shrinkage, and you can see that across all the categories. Although, in fact, the overall number of school leavers that were recruited actually went up, but in terms of the number of employers, more were declining, more were reducing their recruitment than were increasing it. But this year we see quite a big shift. So while in general there isn't a massive change in the number who are increasing their recruitment, there's an awful lot more who are staying the same. So the shrinkage has stopped. That's what we can say, is that it looks like, whereas last year we saw a student labour market that was contracting, this year we see a student labour market that is growing. It's quite stable. It's not going to grow massively. Whether it will grow enough to go back up to the 2019 levels, not sure, but it is growing. And so that's quite a big and quite an important shift, I think. If we break that down by sector, we can see a bit more detail of this. I'm just trying to get it so I can actually see these slides. There we go. So if we break it down by sector, we can see that there's quite a lot of variety. And so I've ranked these slides by the number of employers who are, or the proportion of employers who are shrinking. So the further to the left-hand side, so retail and fast-moving consumer goods, there's quite a lot of retail and fast-moving consumer goods employers who are saying, yeah, we're probably going to recruit less this year than we did last year. By the time we get down to finance and professional services, there's hardly any employers that are saying that, and an awful lot that are saying, yeah, we're going to recruit more, we're growing. So this gives us a sense with the graduates that we've got quite a bit of variety between the different sectors. If we look at school and college leavers, we can see, again, quite a bit of variety here. So, public sector, pretty much that, nobody's recruiting less than they were last year, but in comparison in the built environment, construction and so on, they're recruiting quite a bit less than they were last year. But there's also quite a lot recruiting more there. Some of these are not got huge sample sizes, so we shouldn't overestimate this, but it's worth looking at how some of these sector variations look. If we look at interns and placement students, again, you can see some big variations. So energy, engineering and industry, retail and fast-moving consumer goods, generally turning things down, public sector turning things up a bit, IT and digital and so on. So again, this is the story that we've kind of been looking at throughout the pandemic. The way the pandemic is playing through is not even, it's not equal for different groups of people, and it's not equal for different sectors. But overall, I think what we can say is that we're seeing a generally a kind of more positive labour market than we were last year, one that is growing, one where people are starting to start hiring again in greater numbers in some cases. So we then thought, well, okay, we kind of know a lot of what how we've run the recruitment programs this year, the development programs this year. We kind of know that, you had to make decisions to do that for this year. So let's look forward to September. Where do you think you're going to be? What are things going to look like in September? And we gave them a bunch of different some of the most common activities. And we said, what do you think is going to happen? Now, the data I've just shown you before, that was just employers responding. Here we're going out to the whole ISE membership, so we're looking for responses from anybody who might be in the know. So some of these people are in universities, some of them are suppliers, some of them are employers. And we're saying, okay, what do you think is going to happen next year? Will we be running assessment centres face-to-face? And pretty much everyone says no, we're not going to be doing it face-to-face. Might be doing it blended. And the pattern here is really, really clear. So we've asked variations of these questions quite a few times over the last year. And often one of the most significant things is that we've had huge don't knows or not sures. And this time we didn't get it. So most people know what they're doing. Now there is still, there's still quite a large number of people who perhaps either don't have any knowledge of this area, or for their organization, they still haven't made the final decisions yet. But most people are now becoming much clearer about what things are going to look like. And in general, the overarching pattern is that we are seeing blended provision as the kind of new normal. So in some areas, so if we look at somewhere like something like careers fairs, we're seeing almost the kind of face-to-face part of it disappear altogether. And we're seeing a very big growth of the number of online providers. Now, bearing in mind, a couple of years ago, we probably would have said almost all careers fair type activities were happening face-to-face. And now we've got the biggest proportion of them happening online. The next thing being some sort of blended model. Now, there's questions about what that really means, and then hardly any face-to-face. So what I've done is rank these things by the likelihood of being face-to-face. So if we go to internships and placements, there's still 20–25% of employers who are saying, actually, yeah, we're pretty much going to run this face-to-face. It'll be fine next year, we think. Big proportion saying we're going to do blended, and there's a small proportion saying no, we're going to stick with the online approach that we've developed. And as we go through, it gets less and less likely that people are doing things face-to-face. So induction and onboarding, work experience. And by the time we're down at careers fairs, talks and workshops, we're seeing it's very unlikely that employers are going to be doing stuff directly face-to-face, and that's going to be the main way they're going to be delivering it. But all of this raises a key question. What does this blended really mean? Is it just really face-to-face, with a little bit of online, or is it really just online? And certainly when I was presenting this to one of our sector groups, one of the town halls, I think a fair challenge was to say, well, I think a lot of employers are just ticking blended when what they really mean is they don't know. And I think there is probably some truth in that, because we're still figuring out what these blended models are going to look like. And a lot of it is going to depend on what is possible. What is it going to be possible to organise a big careers fair in a sports hall, with hundreds of students walking around and 100 stalls and so on? It's possible that won't be, that you wouldn't be able to get health and safety support to do that. So the question will be, what does blended mean? But I think there's a really clear signal from the market here, which is saying we think there will be a paradigm shift between what student employment practice looked like pre-pandemic and what it looks like post-pandemic. And probably the honest truth is that we're all still working out exactly what that's going to look like. But I think we shouldn't assume that the new normal is the same as the old normal, and that we will just go back to everything that we used to do. And I think a lot of what people are waiting for is for new models and new approaches to emerge. So this is some stuff that we might want to think about a bit more. Okay, then the final questions we asked in this poll that we ran with our members, again, this is for all ISE members, includes education members and also people in supplier kind of roles. Actually, there weren't huge differences in confidence. I did have a look at the differences in confidence between the different types of ISE members. There weren't huge differences, so I'm not talked about that very much. So what I'm going to talk about is why we measure confidence. So what is confidence? Why do we measure confidence? Well, when we talk about confidence, we're often talking about things like consumer confidence. It's this idea that people might make decisions based on how confident they're feeling. So in terms of consumer confidence, that goes fairly easy. Like if I think I'm going to keep my job and I'm still going to be in employment in 2 or 3 years' time, then I feel pretty confident about taking out a loan and maybe going and getting a new kitchen. And I also feel probably confident about making some frivolous decisions, like I'm going to go out for dinner tonight and these kinds of things. If I feel generally a lack of confidence, I'm not confident that I'm going to be employed, get a pay rise, that my investments are going to perform well, then I feel a bit less likely to do it. And the labour market works in just the same way. So if we can figure out how people are feeling in general, it's probably going to be a good predictor as to how they're going to behave in the longer run. So we asked 4 questions to try and measure this confidence, and we're going to probably keep asking these questions or variations on them each month and see how confidence goes up and down. So the questions we asked was, my organisation will grow over the next 3 years. So, do you feel your organisation's in good health and improve, things are improving? There are sufficient opportunities available for young people who are leaving education or have recently left education. So that's really a direct judgment on the state of the student employment labour market. And then the worst of the COVID crisis is over. What do you think? And what about the worst of the economic crisis? What do you think about that? So what we're saying is that if somebody's answers to that was, well, I'm in a shrinking organisation, it's laying off people, I don't think, my kids are ever going to be able to get a job. I think, COVID, we're going to have another spike in September, and I think, the recession is going to get worse and worse. If somebody gave you those answers, it would be pretty unlikely that they would then be advising their boss that, yes, it was a good idea to go out and recruit lots of new people for this year. And similarly, if somebody said, yeah, our organisation's doing brilliantly, there's loads of opportunities in the labour market, COVID's finished, the economy's doing brilliantly, then you could probably think that that person is going to be advising anyone who will listen that we should be taking on more people, there's opportunities, we should be growing. So these confidence questions hopefully give us a sense of where the labour market is going a bit longer, because it tells us what our industry, how confident our industry is feeling. So what did they say? Well, unfortunately, we didn't get a very clear answer from members here. So generally, people are feeling okay about their organisation. Now, bearing in mind, they could be feeling a lot better. The scale here goes from essentially -2, which is I strongly disagree, to 2, which is I strongly agree. And most of these answers are somewhere between the 0.5 to the 0. So there's not really strong sense of how things are going. But generally, people were more positive about their organisation. The thing that was closest at hand to them, they felt, yeah, we're doing okay. We're going to take on some new people. We're doing okay. COVID is over. People again feeling, on balance, optimistic about that. Yeah, seems like the worst of this is over. We're moving out of COVID. So in general, people are feeling more positive about that. Are there enough opportunities for young people? Generally, probably not. Not really strong reaction again, generally not. And then the strongest reaction that we had of all was, is the economic crisis over? And people say no. Now, as you can see, not hugely strongly, people are not sure, but on balance, people think it's probably the economic crisis is not over. So this, I think, gives us quite a lot of pause for thought. So this year, we can see recruitment is recovering. We can see that the picture is improving. Over the longer run, I think we would have to say that our industry is unsure what the medium to long term is going to look like, and that there is a bit of a mix of optimism and pessimism here. So key takeaways for me, I think, are that student employers are increasing recruitment levels. Whether this will return us to pre-pandemic levels remains to be seen. There is a decisive shift away from face-to-face practice in student employment. This seems quite unlikely to be temporary, but as I said, it's not absolutely clear what the alternative is. Will it be fully online? What does this blended category hide within it? On balance, I think the market is confident about organisational growth and hopeful that the worst of COVID is over. It's not so confident that there are enough opportunities for young people, nor that the worst of the recession is over. And so we've got this kind of mixed picture to finish on. There's my details if you want to get pick up anything else about me, but I think we'll pick up some questions here.
That was great. Thanks, Tristram.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Tristan. That's really useful. I've had one question through from John. He put in a bit early when you were talking about hybrid. Interesting, I put a comment in the chat. I was on LinkedIn early this morning, and I saw somebody, David Setofsky, who I know in Australia. He runs a sort of assessment company business, and it was video footage of them doing a live assessment centre, actually an office full of candidates. And I thought, God, that really did feel like a throwback. So it shows that in some parts of the world, yes, they have fully gone back to face to face. Anyway, I digress. John was asking about drilling down in a bit more detail, and I know this is difficult, but I was wondering if there's anything from the town halls that you picked up. So I'm thinking about, our employers saying, well, actually, this blended approach, it might be that we might do more specific targeted events on campus, but we won't do, the big events, what we've learned about being able to reach a broader audience. I don't know, are there any indicators that you've picked up that might just shed a bit of light in terms of what hybrid, because I doubt it's going to be, right, we're going to do one event and it will be half online, half hybrid. It's going to be more subtle than that, I would have thought, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it will probably be a mix, and some of it will be quite market driven. So I mean, I haven't. You've probably picked up more of this, Stephen, than I have. But from what I've heard from employers, the ones that are most worried are the ones that struggle to recruit. So if you're a really popular employer and you've over the last year you've probably invested a bit in online marketing and online assessment techniques and stuff, and for the moment, there's nothing really to compel you to throw everything in the back of your car and drive up the M1 to run a careers fair. If you're the kind of employer that struggles to recruit or is recruiting huge numbers, then there might be a bit more case for you to be on campus. And so people are looking at things like, can we have a stall outside and do some, leafleting for people that drive them onto online activities and things. So, but I think and I think this is a challenge as much to universities as it is to employers, is to kind of develop a new paradigm. And we've had probably 50 years of careers fairs and employer talks in classrooms and networking events. And I think there's kind of a bit of a need for a new paradigm, and I'm not sure it's fully emerged yet. And some of the experiments with fully online careers fairs, I think we're picking up a bit of dissatisfaction from some employers about how they've really been working. I don't know. Have you picked up anything else, Sue?
Yeah, I have, and funny enough, it's something we're going to do a bit of work on. I'm putting together an employer group first of all, and then we'll expand that out just to really get under the skin of what they're saying around online careers fairs. Overall, they seem to be saying that the bigger fairs online haven't worked. It's been difficult to get an audience, but actually where something is more bespoke, more specific to a target audience, or actually where they can promote something via a university but get them onto their own platforms, where they can start to build a longer term relationship, get data that they can use, all that kind of stuff as is definitely on their thoughts at the moment. But I think I'm hearing what you're saying as well, which is that there's a lot of thoughts going on, a lot of kind of thinking and unraveling, but actually quite a bit of uncertainty into quite how it will pan out. John's made another comment actually, which I think is quite true, which of course a lot of universities, that's how their careers operations are funded, or part funded by that careers fairs model. I mean, people have called about the death of the careers fairs for a number of years. I remember chatting to Bob Gilworth. He said, well, the data for a lot of universities shows they're still well attended, so it would be interesting to see if this is that kind of shock to the system, as it were, that might cause that change in paradigm. I've had another question from Alexandra. So she's talking about the shift to online recruitment activities, and do you foresee an increase in psychometric assessments, maybe replacing some methods in assessment centre? Actually, is it likely that the assessment centre may change and be shorter as more is put online? Any thoughts on that yet?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things people always say is that most things that have changed under COVID have changed because they were sort of pre-existing patterns that have been accelerated. And I think that's a pre-existing pattern that's been accelerated, is that people, well, if we look at assessment centres, like, very few of our employers are running assessment centres that are more than a day in length. And if you'd gone back a few years, you would have found quite a few people who are doing sort of longer assessment centres and things like that. So we're now, most assessment centres are half a day or a day. if they're happening face to face. But I think, and one of the things that had sort of that came alongside that was the shifting of psychometrics as being something which you did essentially in an assessment centre as part of the battery of tests that they were giving you in an assessment centre, to something that you did online, perhaps even as part of your initial application. And I think that had kind of already happened. And what's happened over the last year is that process has been accelerated, and also that people have become more creative about thinking what you can do online. So, while we've always been able to test people online. Now we've got these sort of things like virtual assessments that people can do. We can perhaps do some of the kinds of tests that we perhaps used to do physically. Situational judgment with video and multiple choice and so on. And people have been also running group work and presentation type activities online. So I think there's definitely the potential, and people have explored lots of ways to shift them online. I think there's still a desire amongst quite a lot of people as a final stage of assessment to actually meet people and see how they interact with you physically. Whether that's how much that's worth, I suppose, is the question, because the savings from shifting assessments online might be quite substantial. But yeah, I mean, I think we've seen a definite balance in that way. When I did some work on this last year, my conclusion was that people would ideally like to go take some of the assessment back to face-to-face, and that they were less bothered about taking some of the attraction activities face-to-face. I think in the data that we've just got, even that's not clear, and it looks like there's very much a kind of a decisive shift in all areas to kind of online and blended provision.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was on a webinar the other day with the head of HR Europe for PepsiCo, and we were having a similar conversation around what ends up online or not. But we're also talking about, you're right, this pre-pandemic shift to online assessment, but also front loading. It used to be that, the application form got you the interview, and then you did some testing, then had an assessment centre, whereas now, through technology, which seems to have changed considerably, also the number of applications people can make. I think there's a whole other tangent to go down there around actually what does that mean for students, taking lots of applications, getting a lot more rejects, mental health, what does that mean about their views on the market. But it was interesting what this guy said about the approach. He was talking a bit more about experienced hire, but he said actually what he saw job applicants doing too was moving into a situation where they actually make the application first, get through those first hurdles of testing, then do the detailed analysis and research on an organization, whereas the model used to be do all your research first, build that into an application form and submit it. So that might be a shift I think that we're also seeing in the graduate market, particularly as I hear of some employers that are really shrinking application forms, in an effort to make it a bit quicker and a bit easier for students to do. So that could be something to keep an eye on.
I mean, there's quite, because we're doing this complete guide to student recruitment, and we're looking at the assessment and selection processes that some organisations are using. And I mean, there is quite a lot of variety, and one of the reasons there's variety, I think, is that you've got various things in tension, haven't you? On one level, there would be an attraction to saying, actually, let's just give everyone every test right up front. We'll test everyone, and then we don't, because we can now automate a lot of these processes, we don't need to have stages to our recruitment process. We can just say everyone comes in, everyone gets tested. At the end, we kind of score people and move a small number onto our assessment centre or whatever, the second stage. The flip side to that is that people are also increasingly aware of candidate experience as an issue, and putting someone through 9 hours of online tests only to tell them, no, you didn't get it, is not that much fun. So I think people are trying to balance those two things of getting as much information as they can early on, with also trying to gradually still have some kind of funnel process to ensure that you don't ask for huge amounts of time from people who you've got no intention of ever employing.
Right. Another question here is coming from Monica. So Monica's talking about the impact on duration of placement. So are we likely to see placements shorter duration? You know, maybe there's 1 year industrial placements going down to 3 to 6 months, or you know, or the summer internship not being sort of 6 to 8 weeks, maybe two weeks. I haven't really picked up anything on that in conversations apart from the, you know, the shift to virtual. I don't know. Have you heard anything, Tristram?
Yeah, I don't really see why that would be the case. I think it's a kind of like, if you can have someone for 3 months, then you probably would want them for 9 months. It doesn't really become more difficult to have them for another 6 months. I think this is some of the problems that we've got with what do people really mean when they're saying blended? Because if we say, you know, you'll get all of the problems that you've got from having large numbers of hires coming into your organization for short periods of times. I mean, I suppose you've got the capacity to stagger those a bit more if you move into a more blended model. So you perhaps don't have everybody in every day of the week in the way you might have done to help you with social distancing and that kind of thing. But yeah, no, I mean, it's certainly the case that some of the online internships are shorter. But I think it's also the case that online internships covers quite a multitude of sins, some of which I think you're stretching the definition of what an internship is really to include in it. But yeah, I mean, I think, you know, firms that are offering something that's equivalent to the old internships, if they can figure out a way to do it, either through a blended model or by bringing people back face to face, I don't see a lot of rationale for just reducing it by, you know, half the length. But I don't know, employers out there might know better about why they would do that.
It was interesting on one of our finance sector town halls a couple of weeks ago. I don't think you were on it, Tristram. But we do so many, I forget which ones we both on together and which not. But it was interesting. So there's conversation around, you know, what was everyone going to do for the coming year in terms of internships and actually going onto campus. And the general mood actually was that it's going to very much stay at the moment online because that's what people can plan for. But what was quite interesting was a couple of investment banks on the call popped up and talked about how they're getting a lot of pressure from their business to actually bring students in face to face and also have face-to-face introductions. And that was quite interesting because I think there's been lots of talk by some of the investment banks around we want to get back into the office, we want our people back in, we want to, you know, for all cultural reasons, work reasons, and it was interesting the business was putting pressure on the recruiters and developers to make this happen, and they were thinking, well, there's lots of things to think about, one of them being are the students ready for it. But that brought to my mind market forces. So of course there's another element to all this, isn't there, which is market forces. If X employer starts doing something, that might force another employer to do something. If it may not be in their plans, but if it means that, you know, let's, for example, something happens on campus and somebody thinks somebody's going to get better candidates because of it, they're going to follow suit. I think we'll see some of that as well.
I mean, and I also think it may be that the answer to all of these things is a bit different for different things. I mean, from my point of view, I could imagine ways to organise both attraction and assessment in ways that were less physically proximate all the time. I find it much more difficult to feel that people are long-term going to be happy with induction and onboarding, not face-to-face, because, you know, you're bringing someone into your firm, you really want them to meet people and so on, and so, you know, it may be that the answer to these things is not just one answer, it's a different answer for each of the things under different pressure. But, you know, I think the issue about planning, which you were just mentioning about the finance employers, is absolutely right. Is that what we've learned more than anything from the last year is that plans are very contingent, and that you know, we might feel that things are going pretty well at the moment on the COVID front, and that there's a good reason that we could you know, we should be able to plan for things, you know, in September to be better than they are now. But would anybody, probably including Boris Johnson, really hand on heart say they're absolutely certain about that? I think after the last year, it's very difficult to feel that. So yeah, my sense is a lot of businesses might err on the side of caution. And if it does carry on in the direction that it seems to be carrying on, you know, maybe that after Christmas and stuff, things start to shift again.
That might explain some of your confidence conundrum, where people feel relatively positive in their own organisation environment, but actually when they look at the broader picture are more negative. There seems a disconnect there, doesn't there, between
Yeah. I mean, the good news is that the things that people are more qualified to know about, like, I mean, we're an association of student employers. We're not an association of economists or public health experts. So, you know, if you say, how's your company doing, and you say, how do you think students, you know, how do you think students are doing, people are much more confident than if you say, how's the economy going. And so you know, that's good news, really, I think. But yeah, we will be monitoring these and see how it changes. In a way, the most interesting thing will be whether it goes up and down over time.
Definitely. Comment and a question from Joanna, actually, talking about actually that level of applications that we were talking about, saying that you know, students being unhappy about the level of feedback they get. Is there anything employers can do about it? You mentioned the guide that we're producing, Tristram, which is, I think, 130 odd pages. We've got it at the moment, so fully comprehensive, everything you need to know about student recruitment. And one of the things we talk about that and have case studies on is actually how you manage this candidate experience. But just to put it in context, I was talking to an employer a couple of weeks ago who 10 years ago would have got, and this is a big employer, would have got, you know, somewhere around 8,000 to 10,000 applications, which is a big number anyway. They now get 70,000 applications. And I think that's one of the challenges of moving testing up front, is actually, if you're an employer, just the resources to actually deal with that kind of number. It's impossible to do one-to-one feedback. So I wonder if technology actually might help here, which is if you build a good testing program or testing tools, actually those tools themselves can give feedback. But I think it's a fair challenge, isn't it, Tristram? But it's true, employers do kind of worry that they're creating rejection machines as well as recruitment machines, but it's the numbers are considerable that they have to deal with.
I mean, this is the promise of artificial intelligence, isn't it? Is that you could be able, you know, it should be possible, shouldn't it, if you test everyone, for you to then send an automated thing back to someone saying, you know, you missed the top, you know, you missed getting through to the next stage. This was the area that you were weakest in. It might be something you would work on, and give them some helpful feedback. And definitely, there's quite a lot of systems out there that will do that. Whether that satisfies the kind of candidate desire for individualized feedback or not, I'm not sure. But I think it seems like that should be a helpful, you know, contribution to this, that we can give everyone feedback in the way that you never could give everyone feedback in the past.
Yeah, agreed. Just conscious of time, Tristram, I think that's it on the questions. I was going to ask you about the polling, because this poll came from, you know, a new initiative that you put in place, a monthly poll. Is this something you're going to do now, regular polls and regular updates, and something that the members should look out for?
Yeah, I mean, the hope would be that we do a poll every month, and it's about 5 questions, so it'll be a quick thing for people to fill in. We'll probably have it open for about a week, and it should give us some of this sort of data. And so my thought for the next one is that we'll carry on asking these questions about confidence. I don't think there's a lot of point in asking all the questions about recruitment again, because you know, but we might come back to those again a little bit later. But for now, I think we ask those questions about confidence again, and then we might ask about some other things. So if people are interested in the polling, then definitely fill it in, because we got a great response. We've got, I think, over 500 members responding this time. It was you know, really interesting data. It's got us lots of press and hopefully lots of insights that we've shared today. So fill it in. But also, if you are interested in this stuff, then, you know, get in touch if you've got ideas for questions that you'd like to see polls going out on. And it just allows us to do something that's a bit more responsive and a bit more kind of issues based, I suppose, than the big omnibus surveys that we do twice a year. So yeah, we're quite excited about it, and looking forward to getting stuck into the next one, which hopefully should come out in the next week or two.
Cool, thanks, Tristram. Just a couple of comments. So Alexandra agrees that assessments using norm scores compare where people sit in comparison. So so that feedback can be given and should be given automatically. And then Joanna also talking about the bank that she knows that produces a good set of personalised automated feedback. So again, that's something definitely that we can encourage employers to do. When you should be on our mailing list if you're on this podcast. So the newsletter that goes out this afternoon. Sorry, we've got a podcast that's now online, and actually it's with Ben, who's done some work on actually what candidates are experiencing and some of the things we've been talking about, that candidate experience they talk about, and that issue around feedback, etc. So look at that. Tristram mentioned the guide that will be coming out at our summer conference. So just a final plug from me to end on. You can book your summer conference ticket. It is of course way cheaper now that you haven't got to pay for hotels, and we haven't got to book, you know, sort of big venues in hotels. And also we've got multiple tickets, which means that actually, you know, one ticket can get you a number of people from your team there. You know, really rich content. It's going to be spread out over 3 days. You can access the content for 2 weeks. So have a look at that. The dates are 29th of June through to the 1st of July. So go onto our website and you'll see that. Oh, Paul's put a comment in. Yeah, Paul's reminded me, mentioned the deadline for awards entries. So please get your awards entries in. We'll be doing our awards, not as part of the conference, but we're doing them this summer. You never know, that might end up being a hybrid event. We'll have to wait and see. So please do get your awards in. I think that's it for now. We'll have to call it time there. Thanks for all your participation. Thanks for your questions. Anything you want to follow up on, please get in touch with myself or Tristram. And as I said, you know, keep reading the newsletters, keep looking at our webinars and podcasts where we'll go into a lot of these issues in a lot more detail. Thank you very much. And thank you again, Tristram, for pulling all that stuff together.
Bye.